to You Should Write a Book, Telling Your Life Story, Episode 1. So, what exactly is a memoir? If you're viewing this video course, chances are that someone has told you you should write a book. Or maybe you've read a book about someone's life and thought, well, I can top that. I should write a book. Memoir has become a huge genre. People love to read about people. If you've read my bio, you know I used to be a newspaper reporter. One of the things I loved about that job was getting to interview people in all walks of life. These days, I get to edit their memoirs. It's almost as good. Now, while I firmly believe everyone has a story to tell, there are some things to consider before you invest the massive amount of time and energy it takes to write a book. First, you need to decide how you want to tell your story. The most common forms are an autobiography or a memoir. Memoir sounds sexier, and that's certainly the genre du jour. But I've found that some people who want to say they want to write their memoir are really talking about an autobiography. There's a big difference. An autobiography is a life story from cradle to grave. Well, obviously almost grave. It's a sequential linear progression through your life. This happened, which led to this event, and that happened, leading to that event. It's fact-based and basically covers everything that happened to you. People who write autobiographies tend to have lived interesting lives over the long haul. Think of celebrities and politicians. One example is Keith Richards' book, Life. But just because you're not famous doesn't mean you can't write your autobiography. Not too long ago, I edited a doctor's autobiography, which he mistakenly called a memoir. He started the book with his infancy and family in the Middle East, covered the decades of his career, and then his retirement activities. Which brings up another point. Autobiographies tend to be lengthy. Keith Richards is 576 pages. The doctor's was 4 books because he wanted everything in there for his grandchildren. A memoir is quite different. It's a slice of your life, a crucial period where you learned a major life lesson. This last part is key. Similar to a novel or movie, a true memoir contains a character arc, a transformation of some kind in the main character, which is you. The memoir relates just the story of that transformation, starting at point A in your life and showing how those events changed you so you arrive at point B, the end, a different person. That's it. You don't have to go into detailed explanation about your life before or after. A small bit sprinkled in usually suffices. The memoir can thus start at any point in your life. They are relatively short, but must go deep. Based on my experience, most people have one really interesting memoir in them, one watershed event or circumstance that changed their life perspective. The element of a character arc is the most common misconception that people have about memoirs. Most people think that simply relating interesting stuff they did is a memoir, and if you want to self-publish, that's fine. Case in point, I edited one man's memoir of his salad days at college where he worked in lighting for nightclubs and concert venues in Los Angeles in the late 60s. He rubbed shoulders with legendary acts like Janis Joplin and The Doors. While his anecdotes of Jim Morrison arriving late and drunk for a concert were mildly interesting, the book had almost nothing of the author's personal journey during that tumultuous time and how it led him to a soul-searching trip through Europe. That was the real story, not saying, "I like your song" to David Crosby. But because of the mentions of these famous people, who of course have been written about ad nauseum, this author thought he was going to land a major publishing contract. He ended up self-publishing. But the point is, it's important to be realistic about your story. With a memoir, it's crucial that you be willing to bare your soul, warts and all. If you leave out the negative stuff, the manuscript comes across as self-serving and superficial, simply a collection of maybe interesting anecdotes. In Wild, Cheryl Strayed hikes the Pacific Trail by herself to come to terms with herself, her infidelity to her husband, her abortion, heroin use. The book would have been nothing more than a travelogue if she hadn't put herself out there. Memoirs dig deep. They search for meaning in our lives, and that's why people like to read them. They are often stories of overcoming adversity that also address larger societal issues that many people can relate to: addiction, abuse, mental illness, poverty. They must plumb our soft underbelly, the stuff we carefully hide from others, and expose it to the world. Several years ago, I was asked to consult on a memoir that a major pop singer had ghostwritten for her, and it had flopped. After reading it, I told her manager the truth. It was boring. It simply read like a boyfriend catalog, with the singer bouncing from relationship to relationship without ever exploring any one of them or herself in depth, who she really was out of the limelight. Another point about writing memoir: you have to be willing to write negative things not only about yourself, but about other people, and be prepared to possibly sacrifice some relationships. See the epilogue in Tara Westover's best-selling memoir, Educated, about her abusive childhood, for how many of her family members still speak to her. While you can disguise the identities of real people somewhat by changing their names and other details, they will more than likely know who they are. And even when you write the truth, people tend not to like negative facts about themselves. While Aunt Sally has had 5 DUIs, she may not like reading that she's a drunk or an alcoholic. So maybe your idea for a memoir doesn't neatly fit either an autobiography or a memoir. There are 2 other kinds of memoirs that have become tremendously popular in recent years: self-help or prescriptive memoirs, and stunt nonfiction. I'm sure you've heard of Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. It was certainly written as a memoir, but it's not a true memoir. It's what is called stunt nonfiction, basically a contrived memoir. It involves a writer undertaking a certain experience for the specific purpose of writing about it later, as opposed to having the experience organically. Gilbert set out with a publisher's advance of $200,000 to spend 3 months each in I countries: Italy, India, and Indonesia. Travel memoirs often fall into this category. These books generally involve a long period, so the writer has plenty of material to draw from. If you look at the titles, a year seems to be the most common period. Living off the grid for a year, living on a certain diet for a year, living for a year in another culture. Other books in this category can be more along the lines of undercover journalism to produce exposés of society outside the average middle-class experience. Shane Bauer worked in a prison to write American Prison. Barbara Ehrenreich worked in low-wage jobs to write Nickel and Dimed. The result in both cases was prize-winning books that told important social truths from an insider perspective. An advantage to this kind of a memoir is that you know you're going to write about the experience, so you take detailed notes as you go along. With regular memoir, you're stuck with what you remember, and often wishing you'd kept a journal. Another advantage: you can contrive situations because you know they'd make interesting or funny fodder for the book. Elizabeth Gilbert did that a number of times. The key for this category is finding something that hasn't been done before, or a new angle or framework for your story, like Gilbert did with Eat, Pray, Love. Another popular style of memoir is the prescriptive or self-help memoir. This book uses your own experience to teach life lessons in a more obvious way than a traditional memoir, but not in an instructive way like self-help manuals or how-to guides. These are books that often delve deeply into the meaning of life. Some examples are Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which relates how he mentally and emotionally coped with being imprisoned in Auschwitz. Another is Tattoos on the Heart by a Jesuit priest, Gregory Boyle, who writes about his work with gang members and developing compassion and empathy. Not everyone can or should write a memoir. Not to worry. There are other options. In episode 2, we'll discuss fictionalizing your story.